you mentioned, and for any of the listeners or whomever might be interested to the idea of multi-generational trauma, that's something over the last decade that we've got a ton more research on as of late, that traumatic experiences become embedded essentially in DNA and then pass through generations, right? And so if you look at trends related to suicidality, mental health issues, substance use disorder, and trends related to ethnicity, you see higher rates amongst those types of things amongst ethnicities that have experienced, significant trauma throughout the history of their existence.
Welcome to the Break Free podcast. I am your host, David Mancilla. As everybody knows, this podcast is dedicated to interviewing people that are changing this world for a better place, to their enterprises, through their leadership. And today we have with us a perfect example of those people. Corbin, brother, welcome to the show.
Yeah, David, thank you again, man, for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm humbled by the opportunity to be here. Looking forward to the conversation. So can't say thank you enough, man.
Beautiful, beautiful. For the audience, can you tell me your full name? Where do you live and what do you do for a living?
Yeah, my name's Corbin Bigheart. I live in Central Texas, just outside of Austin, Texas. I've spent the last almost decade in the Austin area. Most of my work is in Texas, in the state of Texas, just in general. And I serve as the president of a company called Fundamentals of Recovery, which is essentially a holding company that offers behavioral health treatment services through the whole continuum of care. So substance use disorder mainly, along with other co-occurring mental health disorders, medical detox, all the way through outpatient therapy, outpatient clinics, again, all based in Central Texas. And so my job is to kind of, I'm like a lead administrator. I oversee it all.
You oversee it all, yeah. So you are the one that makes sure everything runs smoothly, and that's why you're in this show. Like I said at the beginning, we interview the lives of people that are changing this world for a better place. Mental health nowadays is one of the worst it has ever been in the humankind in history, and your work is greatly appreciated. So before we go into details on how you're doing that, let's look back at your life. How was your childhood? Where were you brought up? How was your life until you were about a teenager?
Yeah, so I had a really good life as a kid. I was born in Enid, Oklahoma. At least in my childhood and adolescence, I was given good support, good parenting. I always say I kind of hit the jackpot with my parents. Still married, 50 plus years at this point. I never went without. They were loving, caring, kind. I was a good student. I was the type of kid that other parents liked their kids being around. I was always on the honor rolls. I was graduated in the top 10% of my class. And so up until about my later adolescence, I really did have kind of a picturesque childhood. I was happy. I was healthy. I enjoyed my life. I enjoyed being a kid. And I would say too that from the outside looking in, it was pretty perfect.
Did you know how rare that is? You're blessed, for sure.
Very blessed, and I'm very aware of that. Again, I was very, very lucky as a kid, and kind of as we get into the kind of next part of my story, I think that's so much of what kind of can throw people for a loop as it pertains to like addiction, mental health, and kind of where it went awry for me, because I'm sure that's something we'll jump into. But yeah, I had this picturesque childhood, and it didn't exactly stay that way.
What happened? When did you start getting to be straying away from a good path?
Yeah, it's tough it's always been tough for me to nail it down to one or two particular incidents, and I think that's true for a lot of people. I think it's more a collection of incidents, or kind of the way that I started responding to my life and my circumstances, sort of compounding on each other. But what happened was, if I tried to really dial it down into one particular thing, it was like I tried drugs and alcohol, and I had it changed my experience of life. It changed the course of my life. I was probably 13, 14, somewhere in there, the first time that I tried mind and mood altering substances. And, I don't think that I had that realization of like, oh man, this is going to be a problem for me. But I definitely had that realization of this feeling of like, where has this been? Like this fixes me. It makes me feel whole. It makes me feel complete. It makes me feel loved, validated. It alleviates my fears. I thought that, to a certain degree, that drugs and alcohol were like the memo to life, and I had been given the memo and was kind of like, why did it take so long for me to get this memo? And so from a very early age, again, 13, 14, I became like a daily substance user and abuser.
That is, and that's the dangers with those substances, right? I remember my grandma always telling me, stay away from drugs and alcohol. Stay away from those drugs and alcohol. And, when I was a kid, it was mostly, cigarettes and alcohol. Like, I was brought up in a country that was very conservative, so we were blessed that they didn't have much influence in harder substances.
Yeah.
But even with alcohol alone, you can wreck your life.
Oh, yeah. 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 And that's what, again, this was right kind of before what we now know as the opioid epidemic, which, maybe I'll get into some here in a bit, but, there was definitely, I was exposed to drugs and hard drugs and prescription drugs early on. And there also at the time, this was 20-ish years ago, we didn't have yet as much education information about the dangers of like prescription drugs, prescription drug abuse. It was something that was sort of molded into the culture of the region that I was from. I knew that I had a history of alcoholism and substance abuse in my family tree. But at the time it felt like experimenting. It felt like I was having a good time. It felt like maybe something of a phase. And again, I had no idea or indication of what it would eventually, turn into.
And you're right. What these substances do is they actually alter your consciousness, right? And they make you feel more empowered, if you will. I remember, when I started dating, I had to drink alcohol just to get up just to grab that confidence to go speak to somebody that I wanted to speak. And why would you have to do that, right? It's because your mind was getting numb by the substance. And the problem with this is that then you think this will fix everything, and then you fall into the trap, right?
Yeah. And I love the word that you used there, David, empowered, right? Because that's really what it was, and it served that purpose, for as long as someone like me can make it work, right? Like, I was empowered by it until, like with so many of us with substance use disorder, it slowly over time kind of slow drips into this where it's no longer empowering, but it's actually taking all of your power. In 12-step recovery settings, we use the word powerless. And that's really what it turns into is it strips you away of all of your power. And so, I just wanted to point out again that I like the word that you used there, empowered, because that kind of principle or the dynamic, the power that it provides, it's interesting to see how the dynamics shift once it turns into like full-blown addiction, and then how that looks in recovery. I think that's well stated.
How long did it take you? Because I know that at least for me, in my experience as a teenager, even having a beer made me wanted to throw up. So it took a while for me to say, okay, I can do this. And I remember even in my early 20s saying, I only drink because everybody else is drinking, but the taste was horrible until I finally got used to it and I started liking it.
Yeah.
How did you go through a phase like that? And how did you overcome that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm also always kind of intrigued by people's first kind of interaction with mind and mood altering substances. And, did you like it? Did you not like it? I happen to fall into the category of, from the jump, I really liked it, including the taste, including the effect produced. I don't know if that's like a personality thing. I don't know how much like genetics influence that. I'm Native American, and we have a long history of like intergenerational trauma that leads to alcoholism and other health issues. And so I don't know if I was just kind of genetically engineered or had a genetic predisposition, but once that happened, I like really did never go through a period of that a lot of like teenagers, adolescents, people, discovering mind and mood altering substances for the first time have. I mean, again, from the moment I tried alcohol and from the moment I started trying other drugs, they fit for me.
Yeah, I recently came out of an incident with mostly psychedelics, and it's because they are very popular, right? So I fell into that trap. I didn't have that predisposition as you had. However, my grandfather, not to other drugs, but to alcohol, right? So my grandfather, he actually passed away from alcoholism. So my dad was very careful with alcohol. I mean, he will drink 1 or 2 drinks in a social setting, and he was always making sure that I will never fall into the trap of his dad. So he was always concerned about, consuming alcohol in the family. But I didn't have, I did suffer through my life because I was using it as a medicine to control stress once I was running my business. And I realized that I could have become an alcoholic, but I didn't have that chain, if you will, because my dad broke the chain. And, right after I came out of this whole psychedelic experience I had in the last 2 years, I broke out, actually, thankfully. I broke out July last year out of that. And it's funny enough because it was personal development that led me into that path.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Yeah.
So I thought, there's got to be an explanation for this. So I went back, I was brought up Christian. I'm a born again Christian. So I went back and started reading the Bible. And all the answers I were there for my questions. And what you're saying about your DNA and coming from other generations is actually biblical. So the Bible says that you have multi-generational chains. So that if your ancestors were in those addictions, if somebody doesn't break the chain in your line, you get it, right? So for me, my dad was the one that broke that line, but my grandfather died from alcoholism, and great grandparents were in the same boat, and most of them were very ill by alcohol abuse. So for me, it was like this ends here, right? Because what happened to you with the other mind-altering substance and alcohol is what happened to me with psychedelics. As soon as I tried it, it was like, oh my God, where was this before, right? It's like, oh, this is the solution for all my problems.
Yeah.
And knowing that what you're building is a hole and you're building a jail that is very hard to get out.
Yeah. Yeah. So a few things there, David. I mean, you mentioned, and for any of the listeners or whomever might be interested to the idea of multi-generational trauma, that's something over the last decade that we've got a ton more research on as of late. So there's a lot of stuff out there that you can look into and research to get a better understanding. But we know basically at this point, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that traumatic experiences become embedded essentially in DNA and then pass through generations, right? And so if you look at trends related to suicidality, mental health issues, substance use disorder, and trends related to ethnicity, you see higher rates amongst those types of things amongst ethnicities that have experienced, significant trauma throughout the history of their existence. Right? Again, I mentioned Native Americans, and it's like, we all kind of understand what that looked like for natives 200-300 years ago. And how those experiences and that embedded trauma gets passed through generations, literally through DNA, and then it puts people, in modern times, like myself or yourself, or in these positions where it's ingrained for us to have this response to seek safety, a response to protect, and kind of emotionally and psychologically how we adapt to or respond to our environment. It's crazy to think about those response mechanisms are literally developed hundreds of years back, influenced by traumatic experiences hundreds of years back. And then, to your point about, becoming, we could use the clinical term dependent as it relates to mind and mood altering substances, whether it be prescription drugs, street drugs, psychedelics, alcohol. We unconsciously begin to depend upon these substances to provide either that sense of safety, that sense of freedom, that sense of understanding, that sense of ease, right? I'm going to be okay. This makes me better. This makes me feel better. You had mentioned stress related to work and using it as a coping mechanism. And so, you do that over a long enough period of time, you ingrain these behaviors in your central nervous system that like every time I experience a negative human emotion, or specifically an emotion like stress, I've developed again this unconscious behavior or dependence to reach for the mechanism that I use to treat that. And it really does become this sort of light switch where it's like I experience this emotion and I know how to fix. I experience emotion, I know how to fix. And then so those of us that have done that for a long enough time get in this place where we're dependent upon that to cope and to medicate. And then without that, we've lost any sense of how to cope, right? Or any skills on any mechanisms on how to deal with, honestly, so some of us, just the stresses of daily living without having that thing that solves the discourse for us.
Yeah. And it's crazy because at the time it seems like a great solution. Mm-hmm. But what you're doing is you're actually carving your own deathbed, because the result of that is actually death. If you don't stop, you live in that industry. If you don't stop, people actually die.
Yeah.
So it's not a solution.
Yeah, right. And that, to your point, in my efforts to work with other men to find freedom spiritually, emotionally, practically, one of the things that I try and talk to them a lot about is like, let's talk about the period of time that it worked, right? That it served its purpose, that it did make you better at work, that it did make you a better husband, a better boss, better with the ladies, smarter. Like, let's talk about when you started using the substance and it provided you what you needed without any negative consequence or recourse. And the challenge, what can happen a lot is a lot of us have those periods like you're talking about where it's like, man, this is fixing me. This is doing what I need it to do. And then we spend another year, 5, another decade trying to recreate or chase that period when it did. And it's sort of instilled this idea that there was this period of time where this worked and it served its purpose. And so I'm constantly just like attempting to recreate that, to make that happen again when, as you've mentioned, it stops being a solution, and it's hard, if not impossible, to get back to that place where it was effective.
Exactly. So
Sure.
when you started into this, derail your life, how long did it take until you realized that you had a problem?
Yeah, so kind of just diving back into that experience, I pretty quickly, I would say, again, talking about it working, I would say 3-4 years it worked, and then it didn't. And substance use disorder being a progressive disease, I eventually started transitioning to harder drugs, to the point that I was an IV heroin addict, along with being dependent upon alcohol. I'm a drug addict and an alcoholic. If it's a mind and mood altering chemical, I have an issue with it. And like so many of us with substance use disorder, we're often the last ones to that party of realizing we've got an issue. My loved ones recognize it, my friends recognize it, my coworkers recognize it, but being able to make that admission is so challenging. And that kind of goes back to the idea that I was talking about again of like we covet this period where it worked. And I don't want to, it's played such a crucial role in my existence. Mind and mood altering substances have played such a crucial role. And I believe that they're part of my success. I believe that they're part of what make me, right? And so the idea, of, I can't do this. These aren't safe for me. I have a problem. The idea of admitting that for most of us can be really, really scary. And so, to be more specific to the question, I would say it took me another 5 years after I was in full-blown like IV drug use, for me to really internalize and get behind the maybe even just being able to admit that I might have a problem. I resisted that idea for a long time, despite the fact that, being objective and just kind of looking at it from an evidence-based perspective, it was pretty obvious. Everyone recognized it. But I resisted that idea for as long as I could until it beat me into a position where I no longer could.
The thing is that, it's incredible, right? Like the Lord has been so good to me that I was never addicted to any of the substances. And when I said personal development got me into it, it's crazy, right? Because we come back with childhood traumas. At least in my case, it was childhood traumas that created this victim mentality, which now I realize that is ego inverted, but it's still ego. And then you have problems in life, and then you start trying to read books and from all these people and gurus, and they were endorsing mushrooms, and then I started learning about ayahuasca and LSD and all these things, right? And you're like, and that's probably my path. And then most of these people that endorse these drugs, they say, oh, and alcohol is bad, don't drink alcohol. So because they tell the truth, you know the truth, you follow the truth, but then the truth gets distorted into seducing you into these other drugs. And I really thought, especially after, I remember they took me to this personal development group, and they gave me, I did ayahuasca, session of ayahuasca. Thank God it was only one time. I got so sick from it. The ride was like, more than 6 hours. It was a crazy experience. But I thought it had healed me, right? And then they introduced me to mushrooms. So I started doing mushrooms that are so popular now, and they say they are healthy and all this and all that, but my personal experience says otherwise. And that's what the substance that I was using. Thank God it was only like a 3-4 month period where I was doing these things. And I felt like I was better, and I was losing weight, and I wasn't stressed anymore, and I thought I could conquer the world. Mm-hmm. And then I go to the doctor. I remember going to the doctor last year at the end of June. And because I started developing this huge stomach pain above my stomach. And the doctor ordered all kinds of blood tests. And to make the long story short, the doctor asked me, tell me what you're eating or what your habits. Are you drinking a lot of alcohol? I'm like, no, I stopped drinking alcohol. And, and I always took care of my health. And I was always, doing intermittent fasting and working out. And he says, well, you have acute pancreatitis. One more level and you're going to develop pancreatic cancer. And I'm like, what? And he says, tell me what you do. And then I remembered the psychedelics. So I told him, and he says, that's what it is.
No.
If you don't stop this right now, you're going to have pancreatic cancer and you're going to die. And then I remember, I have this predisposition in my family. My mom died at 33 from pancreatic cancer.
No.
So talking about DNA, I mean, she never had drugs in her life before because, from another era, but she still died from pancreatic cancer. And that was the path that these psychedelics were taking.
Yeah, man, David, I really appreciate you sharing that story. And it's worth noting, like, we are, from a behavioral health perspective, mental health perspective, spiritual health perspective, and our culture in the U.S., and even to a varying degree from a global perspective, we're starting to shift into this era where there's more therapeutic backing for psychocyclines, psychedelic drugs to use as a form of treatment, mental health, behavioral health, spiritual health. And my jury's still somewhat out on that, but I'm interested to watch over the next decade or so, because you are going to see this trend take off, and it be more medically and therapeutically supported, even to a point where we will likely have the major insurance companies covering costs associated with psychedelic treatment, right? So it becomes a sort of medically supported and evidence-based therapeutic modality, right? Like method to treat. And I'm interested to see, man, like the story like you just shared, right? Like over the next 5 to 10 years, how many more stories of those do we get where, maybe people jump into it for the wrong reasons or somewhat misguided. And that's a really hard thing to kind of therapeutically keep contained. And then you've got the medical side of it. It becomes a very tricky dynamic to try and manage. And so when you're dealing with someone's health, and more people engaging in those dynamics, it's going to be interesting to see over the next decade or so how that really pans out and how many people are really affected positively, or how many more people have experiences similar to yours.
I think the issue here is the substance abuse. I think the issue here now, after I've been through all this, I went to a psychoanalyst and a psychiatrist after this whole ordeal because I realized I needed this. And my psychoanalyst had been doing his practice for over 40 years. And what he said is, it makes sense. He said, you can use alcohol to heal a wound, or you can use alcohol to kill your liver. You could use morphine to ease pain for somebody that just had an operation or they're going through an operation, or you can use morphine to kill somebody.
Yeah.
So I think the problem is the substance abuse and the self-medication and using it to calm emotions. Because that's what I was doing with alcohol back in 2011, right? I started with a glass of wine because I was so stressed after work. And so, and I read an article, a glass of wine is actually good for you. It's going to give you antioxidants and all these health benefits.
Mm-hmm.
But then after a year, the glass of wine became a bottle of wine at night. You see? So I became abusive, right? There's nothing wrong for me or for people that don't have that, condition, the addicted condition. There's nothing wrong for me to have a glass of wine if I'm having dinner with my wife once in a while. But it's wrong for me to have a bottle of wine every night because I'm so stressed that if I don't have it, I cannot fall asleep.
Yeah. And with that sentiment in mind, man, and this is a Pandora's box I don't know that we need to open today, but it leads way to this conversation about like, okay, if we're behind the idea that substance abuse is kind of driven by underlying emotional discourse, right? And in a general sense, people turn to these methods to cope with underlying emotional discourse. Well, you referenced earlier in the discussion about the increase in substance use disorder in the United States over the last 5, 10, 15 years. We referenced the opioid epidemic. We're seeing this get worse, right? And so if you look at the United States relative to other developed regions of the world, that creates room for this discussion about what is it that's going on in our culture, socially, psychologically, in our homes, parenting, in our education systems, that's creating this situation for people in the United States, citizens of the United States, to more frequently develop those underlying emotional, those patterns of emotional discourse, and then not being equipped with the skills to deal with that in healthy ways, and more frequently, at least more frequently than other developed regions of the world, more frequently turning to very dangerous mind and mood altering substances. And that's, I think, again, that's a big conversation, but I think it's a really fun one to have. Start trying to look at, okay, what's fueling this and how do we address it from like a public health perspective?
For sure. And, for me, after my whole experience, and, mark my words, I will never touch any substance that will alter my mind anymore. Because what I have realized is that I was looking for God in the wrong places.
Yeah, love that.
That's all it is, brother. If you think about it, what you're trying to do is look for your creator in the wrong place. It's almost like you have a car and you need to fix the car, and instead of taking it to the mechanic or to the manufacturer who made it, you take it to a washing machine repairman or to somebody that knows how to repair a blender.
Yeah, no. Well said, man. Again, it kind of harkens back to the word empower, right? If we're looking at God, like again, in a 12-step recovery sense, we use the term higher power and encourage people to call it whatever they want. But ultimately, we're talking about a power, right? Like people are seeking power. I too call it God, right? Call it source, whatever. But ultimately, people are looking to connect and be influenced and driven by something more powerful, something bigger, right? And so again, I can tell you from my own experience, a shot of heroin feels very empowering, very powerful, right? So to your point, looking for that power in the wrong spots, like never ultimately over a long period of time, and ultimately being fulfilled, empowered. And so to your point, like again, that's in my experience and in my belief, you said it really well. That's what people are doing, is looking to be empowered, looking to be fulfilled, looking to feel whole, and they're doing it in all of the wrong places. And then, I'll speak for me, and I kind of get the sense that some of this is true for you also. I looked in enough of the wrong places that I eventually got to a place where I only had one other place to look. And that was in what I call God, what I now call God. And it took me looking in all of those spots and failing terribly in being empowered, fulfilled, over a long period of time for me to ultimately be so beaten down and in a place of surrender and on my knees where there was nowhere else to go, but God.
You're completely right. When I experienced this last year, the eye-opener was my doctor with the whole pancreatic thing. I also developed anemia. I took the intermittent fasting to such extreme, because I don't know if that happened to you, but when you're under psychedelics, like I was, you even stop having appetite.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I was eating once a day, and I was only having 1,500 calories a day, and I need at least 2,500 calories a day.
Yeah.
So the anemia was so extreme that they put me on an IV. Like, they gave me iron right away. Like, right after I went to see the doctor, I'm like, what's going on? Like, I don't feel bad. But I was literally dying. So when I went to that place where I said, I can no longer do this on my own. I thought I had all the answers, and I don't. I am done. I don't know what else to. When you're in that place of surrender, you said, Lord, please help me. I know you're there and you can help me. That's where my shift happened. And that's when the light started to shine in my life. And that's when I realized that I was looking for him in the wrong places. And the desert was horrible. The desert was a year of discovering what's the right way to live. After I thought I had it all figured out, I turned 50 years old last year. Now I'm 51, and I'm like, I'm still realizing that I have no idea how to live this life that was given to me.
Now, cool to study kind of the duality, right, of that, or like reflect upon, what it takes for each of us to get to that place of having those realizations, right, and when it happens and how it happens and what takes me there. And earlier when you were sharing your experience about going through this process of self-discovery and what that looked like, when I hear those stories, there's part of me that wants to express gratitude for you, right? That it's like because that's what it took, right, to get you to this moment, to have those realizations, right? The pain, the discourse, the mistakes, the decisions. It's like, if not for those things, if not for that pain, if not for that darkness, I would not have gotten to that place where I'm on my knees and only one place to go.
Yeah. How did it happen for you? Like, when do you realize you needed help and you couldn't do it on your own?
I had that realization. I have this specific memory that I hold on to very dearly, and I hope that I don't forget, about there was a period of time where I was panhandling for money. I was living a very like what I think people would call it a junkie lifestyle. I didn't always know where I was going to sleep. I didn't have a job. I made money via panhandling and petty theft, kind of junkie crime, stealing, breaking and entering. Just a really, really dark and miserable existence. And I have this memory of I was in a bathroom at a restaurant, and I was about to use heroin in this restroom. And I kind of stopped, and for whatever reason had like the awareness or the insight in this moment, and started kind of asking myself questions and thinking about, like, when I woke up this morning, this was not my plan. Like, this is not what I wanted to be doing. I had long since wanted to stop using heroin. I had long since wanted to stop living that way of life. And that question was kind of followed by, if you overdose here, no one's going to know about it for a long time. I had positioned myself where I didn't have ID on me. I hadn't really been in close contact with loved ones for a while. I just had this realization of, like, I could die in here, and it might be a week or more before the people that are left that love me even are aware of it. And that was like a really heavy realization of just how far down this stuff had, that it had gotten me. And then you combine that with like the multiple serious attempts at trying to stop, and it really just gets you into this place of hopelessness and powerlessness. And, it kind of goes back to that conversation of, like, it takes what it takes, and it looks different for all of us. But I had been to drug and alcohol treatment so many times. I had asked for help before, but this was the first time that I was ever really fully in this place where I truly internalized, like, I am not capable of beating this. Like, I, in and of myself, on my own power, on my own decisions, doing what I think I should do, I'm not able to do that. And I think that was the first, in that bathroom on that day, I think if I had to tether it down to the first time I had that true realization of, like, you know, call it powerlessness, that was it. You know, just the waving the white flag of surrender and saying, like, I can't do this, and I need help to do it. And that was also too the first time I remember, at least in my adult life, saying like a genuine prayer. Right? That moment, having that realization, and really, you know, I was somewhat agnostic, maybe even atheist. Like, I didn't care for whatever it was that was up there or out there. That was the first time I can remember in my adult life turning my thoughts to that power and saying, if you're out there, I'm gonna need you, because I can't keep doing this, and this isn't, I can't make this work.
Hallelujah, brother. And you know, it's sometimes, most of the time, that's what it takes.
Yeah.
I think the Lord, what he wants is complete surrender, so he can actually take you. Once you are at the end of the road and all you have is a cliff, and you cannot go back, you have to take that step of faith and says, Lord, carry me, because if you don't, I'm going to die.
Yeah.
When you go to the end of the road, that's when the miracles happen.
Yeah.
You realize that, you know, you're powerless. Your life is over. What did you do after that? How did you get help?
You know, I was really blessed. I've been really blessed in my life. Like, one of the ways that I always kind of tell the story of me finding help and then finding recovery is, the best way I know how to describe it is the stars just sort of aligned. You know, like I had said that prayer and I had put the energy out there, and I think I was ready spiritually, I was ready emotionally. I didn't quite know yet what that was going to look like. But around this time, I got surrounded by a group of men that had been through, you know, experiences very similar to the ones I've just shared with you, right? That like knew what it was like to go through those spots that I was just talking about. And these men that I met happened to have found freedom, you know, have found recovery. And they had something that I wanted. And once I got a better understanding of where they were coming from, and I could relate and connect and go, you know, they know what it's like to feel like I feel. They were once as hopeless as I was. And this group of men took me through a process that they said, you know, these are the steps we took. These are the things we did. And if you do these things like your life depends upon it, you're guaranteed to have the same experience. And, you know, kind of back to the whole like surrender bit, right? Like, I really was in this place of, you know, if these men were to tell me, hey, how I stay sober and how I've found happiness is like I march out into the woods 3 times a day and I eat bear poop and pray to Santa Claus, and that's how I stay sober. I would have been out there in the woods praying to Santa and eating bear. Like, I really was in this place of like, I will do what you tell me if you tell me it's going to improve my life. And I did that for a pretty significant period of time. And wouldn't you know it, you know, one day turned into 2, which turned into 10, which turned into 20, and so on and so forth. And next thing I know, the quality of my life is improving. You know, I start to get filled up by, I got sober and on the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And there's this whole step, it's the 3rd step that kind of we were just talking about, surrendering and giving your life and your will over to the care of God. And I took that step and I was honest and I was genuine in doing it. And then the rest of the steps, at least in my opinion, in 12-step recovery kind of help you continue to carry that decision out. Right. So it's one thing to vocalize that and say, God, my life is yours. But the actual action of placing your life unreservedly in God's care and letting him build and create and do, those are different things. And the 12 steps have allowed me to continue to place my life in his care and allow God to guide and direct my existence. And so it's a long-winded way of saying, like, I got lucky. I was surrounded by people that knew how to walk me through a process. That process happened to be the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the 12 steps connected me with this power that I call God, and I've been able to lean upon it, rely upon it, and allow it to guide my life.
What a beautiful story. You know, you said something that touched my heart. I think we're gonna have to make a second interview because we haven't even talked about the health center that you run. And if you don't mind, I would love to have an episode number 2 because people need to hear this. But you just said that, you know, you allow God to run your life. You know, I started doing that very recently because you go through a process of healing. For me, I had to recover my wife, my kids, you know, my family, because I hurt them so much. And it actually was because of my wife's prayers that I'm still here. Because she's the one that never stopped praying for me. She's the one, like, actually, we read a letter together that she sent me last year in May when I was at my worst. And you know, brother, if you have a condition like that, like I went through, and you add a lot of money to it, it gets 10 times worse. Because now you have the resources to do whatever you want, you know? So basically the path to death is a lot faster. So when she read this letter to me last night, actually, I cried and I say, thank you, Lord, because you used her to bring me back to your feet. And so I'm telling you all this because you said you surrendered your life to God. And it's about two months ago, I was given scripture, you know, it's Galatians 2:20. And basically what the scripture says is that every day when I wake up, I crucify my flesh in the cross with Jesus so that Jesus can live in me. So I no longer live in him, I live. I no longer live for myself, but I live for him. So that every single choice of my day, I'm asking God, what do you want me to do? Before I did this podcast, God allowed me to shine your light through me on this interview, and this is what's happening right now. But when you live completely surrendered like that, number one, that's called humbleness. And the humbleness soul was rewarded by the heavens. It's always rewarded. What happens when you're in pride? When you want to take full control of your life and you do whatever you want, that's when you end up in hell. But when you said, I surrender, I don't know what I'm doing, then you allow God to start shaping your life. And to me, like, I'm starting the best part of my existence. Honestly, I'm starting the best part of my existence. And I feel so filled with joy to have met you. Like, just the way that I met you online, it was crazy. But I don't know it's crazy anymore because I'm giving my life to God. Every morning I said, I crucify my flesh. What does that mean? What that means is not my desires, right? I don't need substances to control my emotions anymore. It's your will, and I'm trying to look your will and try to please you. And pleasing you means having this podcast with you, brother, and showing the light to the world. God knows who's going to listen to this and say, that's what I need. Where can I get a 12-step program? You know, where can I go where I can get help? Right? You know, people are one needle away from dying. And maybe I know for sure the Lord is going to use this episode to heal a lot of people. Right?
So well said, man. So well said. And I mean, I'm just gonna repackage a lot of the things you just said. But yeah, I mean, my life every morning and in the evening, I do my best to say, you know, God, guide me, direct me. I base my big decisions in my life on what would put me in the position to best serve God, right? And to best serve God's kids. And through allowing God to shape my existence, my life is so much better than I could have ever created on my own, you know, through my own decisions, through my own greed, my own ego, my own self-interest. My life is significantly better as a result of allowing God to determine how it goes and what he does with it. And then the other, to your point too, man, like I've been around this deal, this way of living for a little over 8 years, and I stopped believing in coincidences a long time ago. I have sat in too many rooms and looked around and thought, like, this collection of people is too perfect for it to be an the conversation makes too much sense, right, in terms of David and who he is and his history and what he's trying to accomplish, and Corbin and my history and what I'm trying to accomplish. It's just, this isn't a mistake. And the cool thing is, you know, our feeble human intelligence can't even begin to comprehend the totality of what God does with something like this, right? Something as simple as this, to your point about using this as a platform to impact other people positively and allow God to enter their lives. It's like we can't get our heads around just how much God can do with a simple conversation like this.
Yeah, and shine the light. Look at you, after 8 years, the president of a very important organization, helping others get healed.
Yeah.
That's another thing that I learned, that when the Lord chooses to heal you, when you humble yourself and you allow yourself to be carried by the Lord, He's going to use your experience to heal others.
Mm-hmm.
Look at what you're doing now. You're the president of an organization that is doing exactly that. That's how it runs, right? And you don't know how many stories of people I've talked to that the same thing happened to them. I will heal you so you can heal others, and that's where you can see true love.
Yeah.
Corbin, I'll take you back for another interview. We haven't even talked about the organization, and I really want to spread the word. Tell me just one thing before we leave. If you had access to a billboard in front of the busiest highway on earth, what would you write in it?
Oh man, that is such a good question. But I got a pretty quick answer, actually. David, especially in our culture, man, I wish we had more people that saw themselves how God sees them. I wish people appreciated themselves more. I wish that they understood that they matter, that they're cared for. And so some version of, try to see yourself through God's eyes today.
Wow. See yourself through God's eyes today. For you are, it says that you are the apple of His eye.
Yeah, there you go.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Prized possession, right? He made you. He made me, right?
Yeah.
Beautiful, brother. Thank you so much. Corbin, I'll set up the second interview as soon as I can. Thank you for opening up. Thank you for being so honest, and thank you for healing people one at a time. Thank you for your testimony.
Of course. Having me, this is awesome. I've enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to the next one. I'll be here. You just let me know. And thank you.
Fantastic. Corbin, God bless you, and see you the next time. Cheers.
That's all for today's episode of the Break Free Podcast. Head on over to iTunes and subscribe to the show. Starting your own business can be tough, but it doesn't have to be. Visit davidmansilla.com to pick up a copy of the #1 international best-selling book, Breaking Out of Corporate Jail. Expand what you consider to be possible and reach your full potential. And join us on the next episode.